Welcome to Zero Brightness, a podcast about horror video games. I'm engineer and musician Ali Jafar, stationed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm joined by my friend and fellow musician James Woodard, all the way from San Antonio, Texas. Today we're talking about hide-em-ups, a genre that I definitely 100% just made up to describe games that replace combat with hiding in barrels, like shoving your entire human body into them. I'm obsessed because we're both musicians, which means we both might be stupid. Hey, maybe that's what the title means. You don't know. And there's only one way for you, the listener, to find out. Zero brightness. I need to not. Everything is like so fucked up, and I'm just like, people, you need to go fuck yourselves. All you people. All you people. Yeah. I feel like the beginning, like some Dark Mirror version of like an old funk song, you know, it's like there's an intro and it's like, all you people out there, all you people. Like instead of just being like, you're beautiful, you need to dance, I'm like, you need to fuck off right now.
It's like the G.G. Allen version of funk.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh man. Do you ever feel like you're just like, that's when you really feel like you're just growing up and it's over, when you're just like where you're talking about like albums like that you used to listen to, and it's like, yeah, I can't do that anymore.
There's Anal Cunt and Anal Blast, and I always get this mixed up.
Hashtag metal problems.
They should do a super group.
Well, that dude's dead.
Oh, he's the one that like fell down the stairs or some shit, right?
He fell off an escalator fucking around at a mall. Oh my god, it's the funniest way to die, dude.
Oh, my side hurts.
Oh my god. Yeah, that's like my favorite death of all time, probably.
He lived a stupid life.
He died
with his stupid band. Dude, he died a stupid death.
I knew he was dead, but I didn't know how. And then my friend told me, and that was exactly what I said: was live by the sword, die by the sword. Okay, so today we're talking about hide-em-ups, which is a genre name that I maybe invented, but I'm scared to say that.
I think you did, because I googled it and I found nothing. Okay. So congratulations, because it's a great little term.
Yeah, thanks. See, I was too lazy to Google it, so thank you for doing that.
Nice.
I was just gonna live in fear of someone like hitting me with a copyright strike for hide-em-ups. But so I started thinking about this as a genre in the last few years, and I'll talk about why when I run through the history of hide-em-ups. But to define it quickly, my definition of a hide-em-up: conventional horror games that have the combat element removed and replaced with a stealth element.
Right.
So I left it a little bit intentionally vague because, I mean, sometimes they break the rules. Like sometimes there is combat, but it's either ineffective or just ineffective against the main enemy of the game or something like that, you know? Mm-hmm. I think the big thing for me is that they're still conventional horror games and in whatever is a conventional style of the time. So, you know, these games have been around, in my opinion, since 1995, and they've gone through being adventure games, survival horror games, 3D action games, into being first-person exploration-based horror games. And in every era that you could think of from, you know, those times, that is the dominant paradigm of like what a horror game is. I think it stands in contrast to something like the games we talked about last episode, which were very specifically like exploration-based games that had no combat and were clearly like adventure games, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's the big distinction to me, because if you put combat in any of the games we're going to talk about, they would pretty much just be like a standard horror game like Resident Evil 7, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's why I like this term hide 'em up so much, because it's a very specific subgenre,
right?
And a lot of games conform to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let's talk about why. So the genre actually has a long history, but not a very wide history. Like there aren't a ton of titles in this genre. I mean, maybe you could say there are now, but overall, compared to survival horror in general or any other genre, it's pretty small.
Well, there definitely was a boom recently with people streaming.
Right, which we'll get to.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
But so, in my opinion, once again, it starts with Clock Tower in 1995, which is, of course, a Famicom game.
Super Famicom.
Or, yeah, a Super Famicom game. Technically not officially released in America ever. I mean, I think you and I have both played it. We've played it via fan translation and emulator. It was, developed by Human Entertainment, which is kind of like a weird little company that had, small dev teams. It was a little more like auteur-y, almost like a proto Grasshopper manufacturer.
Right.
The director of the original Clock Tower, Hifumi Kono, is I think the guy who kept the series going basically even up until just a few years ago, with like spiritual successors and stuff like that. So he's sort of like the dude who started the series. But the premise of Clock Tower is it's basically a, side-scrolling adventure game with a point-and-click interface. The twist is that you can die.
In really grotesque ways.
Right. So the main thing you do in the game, well, you're trying to explore this like mansion type building and you're trying to, escape, but you're also being chased by Scissor Man, the main antagonist, who's like a little kind of jigsaw looking dude with a big pair of scissors who chases you around. He pops out at random times. And if you don't hide or escape him, you die.
Even though it's a Super Nintendo game, Scissor Man is fucking horrifying.
Yeah, totally.
He will scare the shit out of you.
Yeah.
And he will kill you a lot.
Oh yeah. Like it's a tough game. It's very difficult. A big part of that is the controls are really bad. It's a point and click interface that you control with a Super Nintendo controller.
Yeah.
But it's also
so you're like clicking on the shower curtain trying to hide real quick.
Yeah. And yeah, it's really brutal, but I mean, at the time, there was nothing else like it, and there kind of still isn't.
No, not really. I mean, it's like a super brutal Maniac Mansion in some ways.
Exactly, and the fact that it actually has these timed challenges that are very stressful, and they're a bit, reaction based, but it's in an interface that generally doesn't have any timed action is pretty boundary pushing and pretty cool. But it once again, like it took this adventure game paradigm and it just totally flipped what you're supposed to do with it. Which I think kind of set the tone for all the games that are going to come after it. Just to kind of rush through the series a little bit, because I think at some point we'll probably talk about the series. I like these games, or at least I'm interested in them. But just for this purposes, it's kind of just a historical footnote. They made 3 more Clock Tower games. There's an actual sequel on the PlayStation, as well as another spin-off on the original PlayStation. Both games sort of felt like kind of reboots of the original game's concept. They control the same. They feel the same mostly.
Yeah. Well, the second was called Clock Tower in America.
Yeah.
And I remember having the PS1 demo disc, which, I mean, I played to death.
Right. Yeah. And it's one of the few sort of like Japanese series that came to America with the second installment. So people didn't even know there was this earlier Super Famicom version that I think is probably a better game.
Yeah.
But yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. I played the first PlayStation entry, which was a sequel, as my first Clock Tower game, because that was the first one that came to America, and it was just released as Clock Tower here.
Side note, I'm super glad that game developers can't get away with that anymore, of hiding releases from us because we have the internet. We missed out on some good shit in the 16-bit generation.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, like, just off the top of my head, it's like Star Ocean had the exact same thing.
Secret of Mana 3?
Yep. Yeah.
Mother 2?
Yeah.
Or Mother 3, yeah.
Yeah, fuck. But yeah, so after that, the series kind of tried to stage a big comeback in the PS2 era with Clock Tower 3. Clock Tower 3 is an interesting game because it basically tries to modernize the series in a lot of ways, but it's also just really, really weird and almost doesn't feel like a Clock Tower game anymore. It lets you have normal third-person character controls. There's no more point and click. The game is full 3D, and it looks good. So a lot of the gameplay is running around the environment and finding places to hide and evade the enemies that are chasing you. It also has weird boss battles, so it's not totally combat-free. There's basically these boss sequences where you go through like a magical girl transformation, and then suddenly you're like this avenging angel with a magical crossbow, and you kind of look like Pit from Kid Icarus.
Wow.
It's really fucking weird, dude.
Thank you, Japan. Thank you so much.
What's interesting about this game, though, is that it really feels like that's where the modern version of these games come from, because a lot of the game is just running around. It's hiding in closets and hiding behind shower curtains and doing all that kind of stuff. And when I started seeing more recent versions of this type of gameplay, I was like, wow, this really owes a lot to Clock Tower 3. And it's, once again, I think it goes back to my definition of what a hide 'em up is, which is that you kind of just take the dominant paradigm of what's going on with horror games and you just take out the combat and put in a stealth element.
Yeah.
There's another game not long after, released in 2005, called Haunting Ground. Haunting Ground kind of famously started as Clock Tower 4, and then at some point they decided to change the name, rebrand it, and try and release it kind of in the wake of Resident Evil 4. And they were trying to kind of slam dunk that, and it didn't work because Haunting Ground is too fucking weird. But Haunting Ground does take that, once again, like everything I just said about Clock Tower 3, Haunting Ground just takes it and sort of smooths it out. So it is a really like polished, like well-made game. It has a lot of interesting elements. It has this kind of like gothic, arch gothic aesthetic that's sort of cool. It's really over the top. Anyway, at the time, these games definitely felt like just a weird footnote. Like,
I mean, Haunting Ground was a giant flop.
Yeah.
And it's notoriously expensive now. I think you're lucky finding a copy for $150.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I used to have a copy of that.
RIP.
RIP. Yeah, nobody played this game. It's now sort of kind of having a resurgence with people talking about it and writing about it years later.
Yeah.
But yeah, nobody played this.
YouTubers.
YouTubers. But it's once again, it's interesting to see sort of how far ahead of their time these games were, just in terms of delivering people a different gameplay experience with horror that wasn't just combat based.
Right.
So after that, that's kind of notoriously the doldrums of survival horror and horror games in general, because Resident Evil 4 made everyone think that we just wanted action games with spooky aliens, and we got fucking 3 Dead Space games.
No thanks.
Yeah, pass. Yeah, dude, in Dead Space 1, the part where the meteors are falling, so scary, bro.
Michael Bay horror.
This
is the best horror.
I fucking hate that game, dude. Oh my god.
That was the time in my life where I kind of like checked out of video games because it was all like Xboxes and Mountain Dew and shit.
Oh yeah, brother. Mountain Dew Doritos, baby. So, however, the flip side to all of that in 2006 is that a company called Frictional Games put out a tech demo called Penumbra. Penumbra is really where this genre starts to get solidified into, something current. It is, once again, it's a first-person exploration-based horror game for the PC. There's no combat. You have to hide. If you get caught, you die. The game was put out as a tech demo, not just to showcase the game, but also to showcase the graphics and physics engine, which were like super ahead of their time and now are completely fucking terrible, as you can only imagine. But It really was impressive. I got it at the time. I remember my friends were passing it around like, dude, look at this fucking shit. This is fucking crazy. It was super impressive, and it was super scary to play it, super tense. And in 2007, a year later, they released the full game of Penumbra. Penumbra was a big deal just for being so far ahead of its time and feeling like something fresh and new, but it wasn't like a huge success. The development was a little rocky and the release was a little weird. It was originally supposed to have like multiple parts to it, and it kind of just had a main game and an epilogue. The final product wasn't as technically impressive as the demo, go figure. However, it was successful enough that they, kept making games, and the studio sort of took off, and they followed up with Amnesia in 2010, which is a big deal because now we're really in the current age. Amnesia was a huge hit, and a big part of that is that it went viral from people taking videos of themselves screaming while playing it.
Yeah.
I think a reason I wanted to talk about these games as its own episode and group these games together is that the more I looked into it, and the more I thought about it, the more it's like, this is really like where we get to horror games that feel distinctly modern. Like the business model is based on streaming. The business model is based on virality. The way you play the game doesn't require you to have this huge history with video games, or even know what the fuck you're doing.
Well, I think part of that too is that this is kind of the era where 3D gaming becomes homogenized and 3D controls become homogenized.
Right.
So classic survival horror or horror jank, or even just like 3D gaming jank is gone by this point. Everyone's using the dual stick. I feel like the homogenization makes it easier for people to get into it.
Right, exactly. And just to talk a little bit about how most of these games are designed, a big thing in hide 'em ups, I think, is making them more accessible by just streamlining everything. So
right.
In addition to having the combat removed, you also have a lot of the traditional gamey stuff removed. Like there's not a ton of item management. There's not a ton of like puzzle solving that requires backtracking and stuff like that. Like you might need to find an item and have it in your inventory, but you're not going to have to examine the item or figure out how to use it.
It's more of a story item.
Exactly. It's
right.
Very un-Resident Evil, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a big part of its success, is that like not only could streamers play it and it could go viral and people could get in on the hype, but also anyone could pick up and play it.
I think it was inexpensive too when it came out. I think it was kind of a budget release, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was like $20, $30.
So that helped.
Yeah, and a couple other things that helped. It came out on every platform, basically. So Frictional was traditionally a little more PC based, and with this release, it came out on Xbox 360 and PlayStation. So anyone could pick up and play it. The other thing is that Amnesia is a good game. We're not really going to talk about it.
Maybe in a future episode.
Yeah, exactly.
Volume 2 of Hide 'em Ups.
Yeah, exactly. And I personally, I'm not like hugely enthusiastic about this game. I like it. It's a good game. But
historically significant.
Yeah. I think it's important that it was good though, because shortly after this, there'd be a boom of like indie horror games that streamers would actually probably get more traction off of playing.
Right.
But if any viewers were like wanting to go and try the game, they would really quickly figure out that's like, oh, like Slender isn't fun. You know what I mean?
It kind of reminds me of when they market horror movies and then the trailers are reactions of the crowd being terrified.
Yep.
I mean, what better marketing for a scary movie is to see people terrified of what you're putting out,
Exactly. And it's something that hadn't really been attempted with video games on this scale. Yet with Amnesia, it was basically the entirety of the marketing plan. Like not just on YouTube either. I mean, at the time, if you were reading gaming websites or gaming blogs or whatever, all you were seeing was that, Frictional Games releases the scariest game ever.
Yeah.
And that was basically it.
I wonder if that was intentional marketing or just serendipitous, right time and right place.
Yeah, I imagine that it was a lot of serendipity, but I don't know because, well, just a little bit about the game. I mean, a lot of it is supposed to be just this hyper immersive horror game. Like, it's not just first person, it also has all these crazy psychedelic sanity effects, almost like Eternal Darkness or something.
Yeah.
So the more time you spend in the dark, the more enemies you encounter, your sanity degrades, and everything just gets crazy. And it is a really unsettling experience. I will say that I do think it's legitimately like not even creepy. It just is unsettling because you're just like, why is this screen warping? Like, why am I hearing whispers?
Yeah.
I don't want it.
Why do people do this to themselves?
Yeah, exactly. So I think there was definitely, it's in the design of the game, it's built into it, but it also was definitely some serendipity with it just going viral. After Amnesia, there basically starts to be, as I mentioned earlier, there's like a boom of indie horror titles that are more or less kind of like diet hide 'em ups. A lot of them are really poorly made. They're kind of shitty. They're janky. They're mostly based on memes. I mean, that's how we got SCP Containment Breach, Slender, which I mentioned before. God, there's like this endless hallway one. I mean, there's just dozens of these fucking games. And I honestly think that most of these were just made for streamers to pick up and then hope that some of the viewers would buy the game as well. Which, I mean, that shit mostly sucks, but it's cool to see that Amnesia kind of started a whole cottage industry for this type of game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I almost feel like more people want to watch people streaming these kind of games than actually playing them.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm like, because, you know, I got several of these games for free on Steam. I got Amnesia for free. I got Outlast for free. I think that whole streaming subculture is like a big part of this genre,
right? For
better or worse.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't think it would exist as a commercial force without it.
I mean, even RE2 streams are really popular right now.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting to look at it in that context because I view these games as coming from the ashes of survival horror. Just because Resident Evil 4 sort of, you know, as people like to say, I don't know how true it is, but it killed survival horror for a while.
Right.
It made it seem like there wasn't any commercial potential because the biggest horror franchise went to action. And these games kind of spun it around into like, oh, well, actually, you can still have commercial potential for horror. It just has to be done in a certain way and marketed in a certain way. You know?
And I think, you know, after the success of games like this, and especially Outlast, Resident Evil wised up with Resident Evil 7.
Yeah,
and,
that's the best part of all is that the snake ate its fucking tail.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after Amnesia and the sort of glut of indie games, the next big release is Outlast. Which is one of the games that we're going to dive in deeper after I get done with this pedantic garbage. Outlast releases in 2013 and, not to belabor the point, basically does the same thing Amnesia did, but way bigger. More sales, more success, more press. I mean, everything people said about Amnesia, they were saying about Outlast, but even more. Like, if the article headlines for Amnesia were big hit horror game is so fucking scary, the like headlines for Outlast were like super gigantic hit horror game will make you shit yourself and die, you know.
Yeah, well, it definitely had the hype vibe. There was like a little bit of urban legend, kind of like almost like Saw vibe around it or something, or Human Centipede vibe. Yeah, like Outlast is fucked up.
And it is.
You know?
It is, you know, just like Amnesia. I think another strength of Outlast, which we'll talk about it more, but it is scary, it is fucked up, and it is a good game. It's well made. Like,
absolutely.
So if you are following a streamer you like and you saw them play the game, if you went and bought it for $5-10 or whatever, you wouldn't be disappointed at all. You know what I mean? You might be too scared to finish it because I guess that's a thing for people, but like, you wouldn't be disappointed, which once again definitely sets it out from, even historically, like any of the Clock Tower games, you maybe watched someone play it and then went and played it and were like, this kind of sucks. Or any of the indie games, you may have gone and seen someone play it and then went and played it and you're like, these kind of suck. But these are actually, well-made games.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's 2013. In 2014, we got 2 titles that are as big, possibly. On the one hand, we got Alien Isolation, which is the other game we're going to deep dive into, which kind of had a similar...
It made a huge splash.
Yeah.
I think, not just because it's scary and it went viral, but also because it was like the first good Alien game after years and years of everyone waiting for a half decent Alien game. We finally get one. Right.
And the thing that I was going to say that differentiates it was definitely aimed a little bit more at a traditional like PC gaming type crowd. Not only does it actually include combat and it has this aesthetic that, people love, the sort of retro future sci-fi. It also specifically was calling back to Alien versus Predator from 1999, which is like in my kind of canon of gaming, that's like the last good Alien game until we get Alien Isolation,
Yeah, I mean, we had the Capcom beat 'em up, or was that Konami? I think it was Capcom.
Which is
AVP,
cool.
which is cool. It's not very Alien.
No.
It's very anime versus Predator.
I actually thought, what is the Treasure like alien shooter game?
Alien Soldier.
I thought Alien Soldier is actually a better Aliens game than the Capcom beat 'em up personally.
Don't get me started on Treasure games.
The best games of all time? Yeah, exactly.
So weird.
Oh, man. The best.
Anyways, AVP, I played that on Atari Jaguar.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
At the mall in 1995.
That rules. Well, the thing about Alien versus Predator 99 is that it was marketed as like, well, it's a first-person shooter, and you can be the alien or a marine or predator. And that was cool. And when people actually sat down to play the game, the hype around it wasn't just, this is a good game. It was that, dude, play the marine. It's scary as fuck. And I sort of love that, they kind of made a whole game around that feeling. And at least for me, looking, I don't know if it was specifically marketed in that way, not that it matters, but to me, it was like definitely seemed to be calling back to AVP 99. And I thought that was awesome.
Well, they really, I remember in AVP 99, darkness was a huge gameplay part.
Right.
Just like wandering around in the dark and like maybe shooting rounds to see where you're going.
Yeah, totally. And another thing that Alien Isolation kind of takes from it is interface was a big part. So like if you played as the Predator, you saw the Predator layout. And like if you played as, I think if you were playing as the Alien, you're like a slightly different like FOV than the Marine. And
right. The Marine got the classic scanner kind of radar deal from Aliens.
Yep. So we'll get into all that.
Right.
The other big thing that happens in 2014 is PT. The
RIP.
Yeah, RIP. The playable teaser for the canceled Silent Hill reboot comes out, and basically that's kind of the rest of the story, because between Outlast, Alien Isolation, and PT, you've got a whole huge field of games that were influenced by them. And indie games, mainstream games, whatever. We obviously got a sequel to Outlast. We got RE7 that was hugely influenced by all of these games, but especially Outlast. We got weird homages, like the beginning of, The Evil Within is pretty much just an Outlast homage. We got a ton of indie games, but we also have like a ton of indie games that are either still relatively new or kind of on the horizon. A lot of them I actually haven't checked out because they're either like in alpha, beta stage, and I'm kind of waiting, or they're just not out yet. Just to name a few, there's like Visage, Asylum, and Devotion are the ones that I've been following.
Yeah.
Devotion, unfortunately, now is maybe just like tanked due to weird political stuff.
No, I think they patched it already.
Well, but it's actually not on Steam anymore.
Oh, they pulled it from Steam completely?
I checked today and it's not there.
I think they're going to put it back. One of their artists made fun of Xi Jinping and called him Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, little Pooh. He does look like Pooh, though.
I mean, that's cute. And if I was him, I would just own that shit. I would sell merch.
Yeah. But yeah, so we're sort of now living in the kind of post hide 'em up world. There's a bunch of stuff to look forward to. There's a bunch of stuff kind of coming out or getting canceled every day.
I mean, whatever gives us more spooky games, I'm all for.
Right. And I personally, we'll talk about this more when we talk about these games. I really like this genre overall. Like, I'm straight up a fan. And I think in terms of getting back into gaming, which is a topic we've talked about a little bit, like when I was getting back into gaming, I was gravitating towards these games because I don't really like first person shooters. So but I like the control scheme and I like the point of the perspective. So it's like, well, if I can do that, but then I don't have to be like good at fucking, AK-47, like that's great. Like, sign me up.
I'm on Creative Assembly's website because I'm like, I've never played any of these fucking games. And the only thing that I had played from them was a Sega CD game called Microcosm, which is one of those like full motion video games that makes you think you're playing a 3D game, but you're just like flying in front of like a bad like animated GIF.
Huh.
Yeah, check it out. You're like flying through somebody's body and like shooting shit. It's like a bootleg Space Harrier with animated backgrounds.
Oh, yeah, kind of looks like Descent, but it's like in the style of Space Harrier.
Yeah, it's just on rails, and you're like flying through like bad 90s CGI.
Yeah, that looks cool.
You remember in the 90s those like Beyond the Mind's Eye VHS tapes that you would rent, and it would have like all these like CGI demos on them?
No.
To like house music.
No, yeah. That sounds cool.
Microcosm's like that, but for your Sega CD.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds dope.
Alien Isolation is just like an outlier in this like giant catalog of like real-time strategy games, and they did like PC sports games in the 90s.
Yeah, totally. It's really weird. Yeah. So, Alien Isolation, 2014, developed by Creative Assembly, out of nowhere, and their catalog of weird games.
Ends up being a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Big deal, yeah. Like I was saying, I don't know if it's just because it's the only good Alien game, or if it just got viral because it's spooky. I don't know.
Yeah, so the premise is basically you are playing as Ripley's daughter, who canonically exists in the universe of the movie. So they didn't make a new character, which I like.
So every time you die, it's like completely non-canonical because we know that she lives to old age because of Alien 2.
Yes. Yep. Yes. So the premise of this game is basically that you are looking for your mom. You find out that there's a place where there may be her final known transmission.
The black box.
Yeah. And you go there.
The Nostromo black box.
Yeah, the Nostromo black box. So you go to this space station to try and recover it. Shit goes left, and you get trapped in there with, among other things, a xenomorph that you can't fight or kill.
Right. Big surprise. Wayland Yutani is fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the hook of the game is that you spend the game not just exploring the space station, but also having to hide and sneak around this xenomorph. Because if it catches you, you die.
Right. Because shit's hit the fan before you got there.
Right.
And even the humans have turned against each other. And there's like gangs of assholes lurking around.
Right.
And also, you find out that of course, the AI on the system has gone bad. And so you have mean androids going around too.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of the hide 'em up genre that I am now strictly defining, there's a few twists to the formula with this game. A big one that you just mentioned is that there are enemies and you have to fight them. Well, you don't have to, but you should probably fight some of them.
Yeah, you're going to need to, especially in a couple parts of the game where it's sort of unavoidable.
Right. So I still consider this a game in this genre because the main gameplay mechanic is hiding from the alien, and you can't fight the alien. But
yeah, and I mean, you can fight. You're not good at fighting.
And in a lot of times, in a lot of ways, I should say, it feels like the human enemies and the android enemies and then the small alien, like the face hugger type enemies that you can fight, are all there just to sort of distract you and make your interactions with the main xenomorph more tense and exciting.
Right.
Because like you get into a lot of scenarios where it's like, well, I can't fire a gun or set off a bomb because then the xenomorph will come find me.
Right.
But I do want to dispose of these enemies. So you either need to get them into a room, like follow them into a room where you can take care of them, or you have to stealth around them and stealth around the xenomorph, you know?
Well, one thing I've done, I just finished this game. So one thing that I ended up doing is actually coaxing the xenomorph out and making it kill the other humans. And that worked several times.
Right. So this is a good segue into actually what I think is really cool about this game is that it is this style of game. It's clearly a hide 'em up, but unlike any other one that I've played where it's relatively scripted, like you're sneaking around, you figure out the enemy patterns, blah, 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 normal stealth game shit. This one is just totally free form. Like the AI
alien specifically.
Yeah. The AI alien is really complex, especially at the higher difficulty settings. And like it makes every encounter both terrifying and stressful and like a delight because you get to choose how you want to do it. And every encounter is different completely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say the alien is probably, as an antagonist, one of just generally the creepiest. You never feel safe around it. Right. And just invulnerable. If he sees you, you're dead.
Right.
And that's basically it.
Yeah, exactly. And I like how those stakes really force you to explore the game mechanics. So like you have weapons and you have items and there's a crafting system that lets you make ammo and items and et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to use it and you can get through the game without a lot of the stuff. But because the stakes are so high, like you're going to hit a point, at least a couple encounters where you're like, well, I wonder if there's a better way to do this. And maybe let me explore the game's mechanics. Like it's a really well designed game. Everything seems to sort of point you in the direction of, you know, the different mechanics that they've worked out, which I think is super interesting. And once again, super sets it apart from a lot of the games in this genre.
I played it pretty bare bones. I don't think I ever used a flare.
Yeah.
Or a smoke screen. I did use some audio distractions just to get around the alien a couple times.
Yeah.
Generally I played pretty minimally.
Yeah, I did too. I used the EMP mines a lot.
I never used one.
Oh, really?
I forgot they existed. What do they do?
They set out an EMP pulse that disables the androids. Basically.
Oh, permanent death?
No, it sort of disables them briefly, so you can either sneak around them or you can go up and kill them.
Okay.
I got really into killing androids.
Yeah, me too. And I wish I would have known that was a thing because I totally would have used that.
Yeah. So there's these android enemies that you have to fight a lot, and especially as James mentioned, the AI turns on you and they all start coming to kill you, and they're really the main enemy that you can actually fight.
Yeah.
But the item scarcity does come into play there.
Yeah, so you've got like a giant wrench, which is like your general melee weapon. But unless the android is like reeling from a hit or being shocked by something, generally he will catch your wrench as you try to hit him with it and just knock you on the floor.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to shake the androids once they see you, even though they're slow. So you are kind of forced into combat with the androids in several situations. And later in the game, once you have a bunch of guns and you feel empowered, it's just like Resident Evil 2. It's sort of redemption time. And you just want to start just like blowing away these androids that have been like pissing you off the whole time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And once again, I like that they included that in this game, but instead of it detracting from the stealth, it actually plays into it.
They're unique to the universe too, I think. But they're great additions. We didn't talk about the art style at all, but it definitely has this like 80s retro futuristic vibe, which sits in like perfectly with the Alien 1 universe.
Right.
And just the rubbery skin of the androids and the creepy LED eyes. It just fits perfectly.
Yeah. No, the game looks great. The design of everything, even just like the save ports and the computer ports that you use all look amazing.
Keyboards.
Yeah. Oh my god. This is just like keyboard porn for you.
Yeah, it's like total keyboard every time. Yeah.
Yeah. I like the character models in this game. I think they look really good.
They're all sweaty.
They're all sweaty. Well, it's just funny going back to some of these games. Like you just look at the environments are beautiful and the character models look like shit. That's a big thing in Outlast for me.
Definitely.
And in this game, it's not, which was cool. I like that. It looks great just in general. I think.
I think it's aged pretty well. I would say, like the skin's too shiny. For some reason, I played on PC. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I did.
But too. the cutscenes on PC, they run at like 3 frames a second. And it's a known issue that Sega's like never fixed, and it's so stupid. Yeah, they're just really choppy compared to the rest of the game.
Oh,
it's like super jarring if you go from like 4K 60 frames to like a super compressed, MPEG at 15 frames a second. Yeah, especially when they try to make them seamless.
Yeah. I will say one thing that I think this game has that is very much within this genre is that it doesn't really have much of a story. It's more just like a connective tissue to get you from encounter to encounter or get you from set piece to set piece.
Yeah, they throw characters at you. Of course, all the side characters, they're gonna die.
Right.
But they're never long enough for you to like care about them at all.
Right. Well, and that's what I mean. It's like you are just like, go here, do this, go here, do this, go here, do this.
I do feel like that's a fault because all of the characters, a lot of the characters that you meet, they're proxies for real characters in the Alien films.
Right.
Like your character Ripley, okay, it's Ripley. And then you have an android protagonist friend, and he's like clearly Bishop, and he like sacrifices himself just like Bishop.
Yeah.
And all these characters fall flat on their face. And towards the end of the game, I was just like, I don't give a fuck about like the guy I'm talking to on the radio.
Well, I'm going to say 2 things in its defense for that. I'm going to say, number 1, I'm glad that they kept the story light because I think the real story is the procedural encounters that you have. Like the real moments that you're going to walk away thinking like that ruled or like that was a moment or that was a reason why I enjoyed this game are like hiding under the desk for the 50th time from the alien. And that's the time that it looks under the desk and it hasn't the whole game.
Yeah.
And then it looks under the desk and you just shit your fucking pants. Like that's a story. You know what I mean?
This is one of those horror games where like the gameplay is the strong suit.
Yeah.
There's a great history of jank in horror games.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the alien AI being so strong and unpredictable, sort of like what we talked about in the first episode, the zombies and the Resident Evil 2 remake, the fact that they are unpredictable, the fact that they can keep getting the jump on you because you don't know what they're going to do, it keeps it fresh and interesting. And that's how the xenomorph is in this game. And that's, to me, like the real story. The other thing I'm going to say is that it's sort of being like this diet alien with the characters being knockoffs and not. And you have in our notes that Ripley is a bootleg Ripley or Bootly, which is really, really fucking funny. That's a you joke. But man, that's funny. I like it because I think that as a way to pay homage to something or a way to bring that flavor into the world, I like it better than just here you are.
Well, there is a DLC where you play as the real Ripley on the Nostromo.
Oh, I haven't played that.
Yeah, I played it for about 2 minutes and hated it.
Okay. Well, see, that's
why is DLC always so disappointing?
Yeah, it's garbage. I don't know.
On the next episode.
Yeah. On the next episode, we finally get gamers to like us by hating on DLC. Well, no, I think that's a better way to get the flavor of the thing you're trying to pay homage to than just porting it in. I think that's proof. I mean, to bring up Eternal Darkness again, because I'm always down to talk about Eternal Darkness. I love that game, they just made their own fake Cthulhu mythos instead of actually referencing the Cthulhu mythos. Like, there's no real H.P. Lovecraft reference in that game. They just made their own diet bootleg version. They made their own bootly, except with the fucking Cthulhu mythos. And like, I think that's in something like video games and in this context, it's so much more effective to, you know, the proof positive for that in this context is, number one, like you said, there's a DLC where you're Ripley and it sucks. Number two, at the same time they were making this game, they were making the super disaster that was Aliens Colonial Marines.
I forgot about that.
Yep. The like black hole of anything that's enjoyable in video games. And that one specifically had like recreations of the environments from, you know, Alien, and it sucked. And people didn't like it because it's like, oh, you're doing that, but then everything else sucks and it doesn't fit. And, you know, also there is a moment where you get to go and see the pilot, you know, the big statuesque like alien corpse. Yeah. And because that's the only moment in the game where you're really in the original movie, it's like, it's fucking awesome.
Well, there are definite throwbacks at several parts. Like when you walk into the AI core, that's definite throwback to the original set design.
Right.
I mean, when you wake up in your pod, the set pieces are definite references to the films. I think the score references the first two films a lot. Yeah. Which is definitely a plus.
Yeah. And I think that, like I said, I think all that stuff is really cool because they went with the homage rather than recreation.
Yeah. I feel like even the color grading, they might have like looked at the original two films and did color grading.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, in the medium of games, people have waited a long time for, like, you know, when can we just do the thing? You know, like, when can we just have the game that lets you play through the movie? But it's like, now enough time has passed, like, we don't actually want that. It's actually better if there's a unique thing that just is an homage, you know? I mean, it's like people thought they wanted the scene in Ready Player One where he plays through Top Gun or whatever. And then they actually read that in a book and they were like, man, that's fucking stupid as shit.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's Alien Isolation has its flaws, but it should be celebrated as a successful licensed game.
Yeah, well, so I've just been like just talking about how much I love this game, and it's because Alien Isolation really just has one gigantic crippling flaw, which is that it is an entire half of a game too fucking long.
Absolutely. There were several points in the game where I'm like, oh, it's finally over. It just doesn't end.
It's 18 hours long and it should have been 9 or 10.
And the ending is such a letdown that they literally could have cut the game in half and no one would have cared.
The ending is extremely abrupt. And I would actually say, if I was recommending this to a friend who had the same gaming habits that I do, and I even kind of said this to you, I think, where I was just
you were like, don't worry about finishing it.
I would say play the first 8 or 9 hours and then go watch the last cutscene. I mean, the whole last area, which is brief, doesn't, and we'll talk about the end in a second, but like the whole last area isn't really interactive, even though you're moving around. And then the last cutscene is like 30 seconds long and you should just watch it.
Yeah.
You don't need to play the whole game. And the longer the game goes on, the more the systems break down and the less fun it becomes.
Yeah. Well, the first time you ditch the xenomorph is the first time I thought the game would end, and that would have been a great time to end. But you do miss out on a bunch of android fun.
Yeah.
So maybe if they could have, I don't know, I would have moved things around and kept it shorter and sweeter. But yeah, I was definitely like happy it was finally over. It overstayed its welcome quite a bit.
The other thing is that the game is so effective at creating tension that the longer you play the game, I remember at one point actually thinking, like, am I physically harming myself by playing this game for 18 hours? Because
it's not super enjoyable.
It's so tense. Like, it is not even like, I mean, it is scary at times, but it's not a pure horror experience. It's like a pure tension experience, which is different.
You start to feel better around the middle of the game. You've got a bunch of guns, and then they take all your guns away, and you're kind of back at square one for quite a while.
Yeah.
And then you never really get back to the point where you're just like filled with ammo, and you can freely spray aliens in the face with fire to make them go bye-bye.
No, exactly. And I think too, like the thing that I always think about, and so, okay, we should just talk about more of the end game stuff. So I'll just drop a spoiler tag in here. I'll also say too that you can't really talk about either of the games we're talking about today without talking about the endings. So if you haven't played them and are touchy about spoilers, I don't know, go play them first, I guess.
I mean, they're cheap.
Yeah, they're both really cheap and they're worth playing. The ending of the game, like the whole last couple areas are like such bullshit. Because everything that's fun and exciting and creative about the game, where you get to choose how you attack a scenario, is totally gone. And you just have to memorize the path, and then you have to run the path effectively, or you die.
Right.
And then you just die over and over and over, and it sucks.
Yeah, and you just hope that the alien doesn't randomly spawn at that one spot this time.
Right.
Because it's going to be random every time you do it.
And the worst part is that the actual sort of like final area that you have to play is like you're kind of on a spacewalk outside the station and you're like running along the station. I don't think you can fail that actually.
No, you can't.
And it's just so fucking offensive that it's like, you've been punishing me for hours at this point. I've just had like 4 hours of just solid fucking torture. And then you get to the end and it's like, guess what? Now we're gonna let you not lose. And it's like one of those like mediocre post-rock songs that just keeps like crescendoing like way past your point of interest, and then it just ends on a fucking dud chord change or something. Yeah, or just ends on like a little solo piano thing, and you're like, well, that's fine, I guess, but.
And then it gets picked up for a State Farm commercial.
Oh hell yeah, dude! That was so emotional when the dog died during the piano part. Fuck. Yeah, it kind of it's all just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. And so for me, it's easier to be rosy about it because I played it a while ago, and I know you just played it, so you're still like,
yeah, I just played it. I'm kind of salty, to be honest. Yeah. So I mean, gameplay, 8 or 9 out of 10. The Xenomorph experience is pretty unique, I would say. I mean,
yeah.
The closest thing may be Mr. X from the RE2 remake. The Xenomorph is considerably more lethal. I mean,
it was so much more interesting than, so when I first picked up this game, I expected it to be like how Mr. X is in Resident Evil 2, where it's just kind of like a mechanic, and it's tense and scary and it works well, but you see through it pretty quickly. Like, after your first playthrough, it's not really magic anymore,
Well, Alien Isolation is in a game you're going to play more than once.
No, fuck no. But like that's how I thought that Alien Isolation would be. But then when you play it, you realize just how deep and complex it is, and how smart the thing is that you're going up against, and it's a totally different experience. It really blew me away. Like, I wasn't expecting it, and it blew me away.
Yeah. So I mean, gameplay solid 8 or 9. The story is just utter trash.
Yeah.
I get that it could be a minimal homage. I think they could have done better.
Yeah, well, and
maybe the license. I mean, you can't have the game without the alien, but at the same time, I feel like the license comes with so much baggage.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, because like, even if all the canon shit about Alien, and you're like a dork like me who's like seen the different cuts of Alien 3 and whatever, it's like
the assembly cut.
Yeah. Which is actually really good.
I need to watch that.
It's interesting that like, that like, okay, well, the main character is not going to die, even though they keep trying to kill her. And it's like, you've watched her die a million times, but you're just like, well, I know canonically she doesn't die. And then the end of the game has this weird like fake out she died ending.
It's so stupid.
It's super stupid. And then the last frame is like a searchlight lighting up her face as she's like floating in space. And it's like, yeah, I know that a rescue ship comes and finds her, not because I saw it in a movie. It's not, but we know that she doesn't die. So it's like, it's kind of a microcosm of a lot of the problems of the game where it's like, why didn't you just work with what you had a little bit more? You know, like, why didn't you make this shorter, tighter experience that's better? Why didn't you focus less on the story? Or like, why did you try? I remember when I first saw the ending, I was like, that was kind of weird and artsy for a game that's like not weird and artsy. Like, what the fuck is this?
I feel like it was just a total cop out.
Yeah, that too.
Like, we didn't know how to end this, so here you go.
Yeah, totally. And I will say, if there's one big criticism of this whole genre of games is most of them have really dumb endings.
It's hard to tell the story in the first person. I think Doom 2016 did it pretty well because it was so minimal. And, you know, he didn't speak, but his animations spoke, you know, a lot of words.
Sure.
Bootleg Ripley, she's such a wooden character. And I feel like a lot of these characters are so wooden. I mean, even Leon Kennedy.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Soma soon. The main character in Soma is kind of wooden too.
I mean, it's a sort of it's a design flaw in these games you have to try really hard to overcome. And yeah, so next episode we're going to talk about Soma, which is in this genre for sure, but it's a huge twist on it. And I think
Twist 'em ups.
It's a twist 'em up. The original twist 'em up, Twister. It's interesting because I think that game puts in so much backbreaking like story work to get around this limitation that it really makes you look at all these games and say like, oh yeah, these games all have garbage stories, but they're just connective tissue.
Yeah, well, and Soma, there's a plot versus theme here. I don't think Alien Isolation has any like deep cutting themes. Or
No.
the Alien, you're not going to think about Alien Isolation fucking 5 minutes after you're done with it.
No.
You know, it's not going to linger with you like watching Gummo or something.
Yeah, I mean, Alien Isolation is definitely the kids of hide 'em ups.
Yeah.
No, it's not. You're right. Yeah, and I totally agree, and I think that's sort of, you know, harking back to the conversation we had last time. I think these are still in that general world of horror games as haunted houses.
Sure.
Except these are just the big, expensive, crazy haunted houses where they can touch you. And maybe the games we were talking about last time were like something like Layers of Fear is more like the weird, kind of sketchy, broken down, like haunted house.
Well, I mean, Layers of Fear has no other characters in the game besides your protagonist.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why they could pull something like that off.
Yeah.
As a small studio.
Exactly.
I assume writing complicated AI is a bit out of the scope of something like a team like that could pull off.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, that's why I see these as sort of like this kind of evolution of that mindset where it's like, it's still just a crazy haunted house. Like you're just meant to see evocative things and go through and have a fun time. You're not necessarily supposed to like think a lot, but I wish that, you know, this game leaned into that a little bit more. And so it was shorter and a little less involved plot wise, you know?
Well, it's kind of like all the Alien sequels, right?
Right.
I don't really think Ridley Scott's a good director. I think he was just a fluke with Blade Runner and Alien 1.
Yeah, that's probably true.
It just happened to work, and then everything else he made, nothing else was good.
It's so weird because Blade Runner is my favorite movie of all time, like full stop.
As it should be.
But it's one of those things where it's like, I just like that. I don't care about the rest of it. I do like your note here that's just die while saving in all caps.
Yeah. I mean, that happens several times, especially towards the end where it's just like random if you're going to survive or not.
Yeah.
Just run up to the save box and try to save real quick. The saving is an interesting game mechanic here, and it's notable because it's unique. Yeah. It takes several seconds for you to save once you find a phone, and you're vulnerable during that time. And usually the save spots put you in vulnerable places.
Oh yeah.
So the game puts you in danger so you can save, and then because it's a horror game, you want to save all the fucking time. So there's an interesting interplay with that game mechanic, and I think that's notable.
For sure, and it's really nuanced because like you can end up with like a cursed save where like you load and an alien drops like right in front of you. But what's interesting is that happened to me a couple times, but it never ruined my playthrough. I never had to restart the game or anything like that. It's not like an old adventure game. So you can end up with a cursed save, but you can survive it, which is just bonkers.
Yeah, thank God, because I never would have finished the goddamn game.
Oh, no. I think this is something I wanted to say too, is that I think that it highlights one thing the game is good at, which is that it makes all of these different mechanics, like the stealth mechanics and hiding and evasion and all that, feel purposeful and not like RNG.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like the aliens would drop from a vent and it was just like, which vent's it going to drop through? Vent 1, 2, 3, or 4? And
yeah,
after you die several times, you kind of see the patterns emerge.
I agree, but it's just like, I think it's veiled really well, and it's varied.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's varied enough that it doesn't totally feel that way. And I think that's a big point of contrast to every other game in this fucking genre.
Yeah, stealth games in general, it's very hard for them to mask their gaminess.
Yeah. Like, you definitely get that feeling of like, okay, hide in locker, and then you can hear the gears turning for the game deciding like, is the guy going to open the locker or not? And I don't think I ever had a moment like that until, like I said, the very late game, it starts to feel grindy and annoying. But for most of the game, you don't get that feeling. And that's what kept me involved. That's what kind of gave me that like Mega Man difficulty loop of like, I'll just keep trying again. It's cool, man. You know?
Right.
Which when games start to feel very random and just like it's a numbers game, it's not interesting to me anymore and I lose interest. So that's one thing I can say. I will also say that my official recommendation is if you want to play this game but you're on the fence, just play the first 8 hours and then watch the end cutscene and pretend like you played the whole game.
Yeah, I mean, play it and don't feel guilty if you don't want to finish it.
I mean, I'd say that about any game.
I mean, plus it's so cheap. I mean, it's constantly on sale with all the DLC for like $5 or less.
Yeah, I think I got it for like $1.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd say in general, I feel that way about every game where it's like, if you lose interest, you don't want to finish it. That like you do you, but especially a game like this, you know.
My backlog haunts me at night though.
Yeah, but so does a lot of things.
Absolutely. I'll smoke weed to that, bro. I'll talk to that.
I'll smoke out the chalice to that, my guy.
Outlast.
Outlast and some of Outlast 2.
Look, I thought I was going to hate Outlast. But, you know, I kind of put it in there with Slenderman, Five Nights at Freddy's, all that viral shit that was going on at the same time.
Oh, for sure. Culturally, it is, yeah.
And totally went under my radar. Ignored it for years. Got it for free in like a Humble Bundle. Mm-hmm. It chilled in my Steam library for like 2 years. And then one day Lacey decided to play it and we just blasted through it in a day or two.
Oh, yeah. I had a really similar experience.
I feel bad because I waited so long to play it. But, I mean, what a great game.
Dude, no, I have a similar experience where I was just like, it's like trash, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then there's so much coverage of this game because it made such a big splash. And I read some developer interviews and I was like, I'm actually kind of interested in this now. And then there was a day where I was really sick and I, stayed home from work and I saw that it was on like super sale. And yeah, I bought it for like nothing and started playing it. And I think I beat the whole game that day. Because I was just like, fuck, like I just need to finish this.
Yeah.
Or at least
I love sick days.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so I'm totally with you. I waited a long time and then was really surprised at how into it I was.
It's got all the hide 'em up tropes. But it's got some interesting game mechanics. Notably, looking through the camcorder 90% of the game.
Right. So the big hook with this game, it's a 2013 released by Red Barrels, who are basically a bunch of Canadian AAA developers who started their own studio. And now they're kind of ensconced as sort of like a big indie, you know what I mean? I guess they're like the video games equivalent of like a Sub Pop or something. But like,
I mean, they have a pedigree. I mean, they worked on the Prince of Persia reboot for PS2. Mm-hmm. A lot of the old Splinter Cell games, like these old Ubisoft cats, like definitely know their shit.
Oh yeah.
So they're not just like a kid that is like, hey, this is my first game.
Right. And I mean, we'll talk about this a little more when we do our episode on Soma, but like with the frictional stuff, they actually are just like indie dudes. Like they came from nowhere. Which is why it's impressive that by their second game, it was so polished. With Outlast, it seemed like they came from nowhere. The company did, and it was a big hit, but it's like, yeah, these guys have pedigree. Like the fact that the game is technically an indie, but it like is so polished and so well made.
I think it's indie in the terms of they published it themselves.
Exactly. But yeah, they have the pedigree and they got some funding, and like the game is really well made. It still looks good today, which is insane for coming from 2013.
It looks pretty good. I mean, the atmosphere, the environments look great.
Yeah.
The character models, maybe they didn't have enough money to hire a perfect character artist yet, but
I think they did something smart, which is that they just didn't really put in any normal character models. Like,
yeah, everything is purposefully like kind of grotesque and ugly.
Right. So it's a really impressive game, but it's definitely like the most hide 'em up.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, I mean, like I view Amnesia as like, which came out a few years earlier, as kind of like where they cemented it as a genre. Outlast is where you get all the tropes. Like, I mean, so the basic gameplay loop is you find a new area, you explore it. Eventually, you run into some enemies, and you have to hide in a locker.
Essentially.
Yeah, and in between, you're a journalist in the game. The main character is, and he's another wooden everyman protagonist.
Yeah.
And
brown-haired white guy.
Yeah, a Silent Hill male, and he has like a camcorder that you can use basically instead of a flashlight. So you equip it and you turn on the night vision and you can see in the dark.
And you need batteries.
Yep. There's light item management because you have to keep a fresh supply of batteries. Otherwise you lose your camera and you I came close, but I never actually ran out of batteries. I don't know if you just like can't traverse parts of the game or what.
I was super concerned about losing all my batteries, as I always am with survival horror games. So I was very conservative in using them. So I ended up with a glut of battery.
Yeah, I think there were definitely points where I had a lot, but there were also points where I was just like, fuck it.
And that brings up darkness as kind of a gameplay mechanic. This game is dark as fuck.
Yeah.
And that was one thing I was going to bring up with Alien, and I didn't, about how Alien Isolation is never very dark.
That's true.
At the beginning of the game, they make a big deal of battery management for your flashlight. Mm-hmm. But I probably used the flashlight 3 times in Alien Isolation. And with Outlast, you just cannot play the game like that.
No.
Unless you're literally a blind speedrunner and know how to do it.
Yeah.
Because there's points where it's just inky blackness. You can't see anything.
Right. Well, and so with all these hide 'em up games, there's a tension between the traditional horror game or survival horror game elements and this sort of, just open exploration based game. Mm-hmm. And I think Amnesia and Alien Isolation are similar in that like they want you to use a flashlight and feel stressed, but light isn't as big of a deal in those games. And that's, to me, that's one of the standout things about Outlast is that like I said, I feel like if you ran out of batteries, you would just not be able to complete certain sections of the game.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So it does create good tension. And I
like
the
score is pretty terrifying too.
Oh yeah, totally.
I think it's better than the RE2 remake score. I think they kind of fell flat on that with the dubstep, but
yeah, the wub wubs.
Yeah, the art direction isn't the greatest, but the atmosphere they build is just pretty horrific.
Oh, totally. I mean, so the setup of the game is, you're this reporter who goes to like a mental hospital that it looks dilapidated, but it's still in use. Just nobody knows what's going on in there. And basically you just infiltrate and see what's going on. And
I think he gets an email from the DLC character, and that's why he comes to investigate.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
And so you basically don't know anything, and you go in and you figure out what's going on. And so, you know, like James said, it's this very basic, like old mental hospital, I guess, type setting.
It's tropey, but it's very effective.
Right. And with the great lighting, the great music, the camera.
Color grading is good. Film grain. It's very reminiscent of the B movie revival of the mid 2000s.
Oh, totally.
Saw, Human Centipede in terms of color grading.
Right.
Things like that. Art direction.
Exactly. And in this game, I like the camcorder a lot. You know, the fact that it changes the look of the game, that it adds this whole atmospheric layer on it. It sort of makes, one thing I felt while playing it was that I felt like it made the somewhat bland art direction work, because
absolutely.
It was like you weren't meant to look at most of the game without the camcorder filter on everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, horror movies from the 80s are better on VHS because you slather all that visual noise all over it, you know?
Well, and so I want to talk about the sequel a little bit, and I'll talk about that it sort of becomes a problem in the sequel, but I always felt that it was a bit of a problem with Silent Hill too, that there were these moments where it had like film grain on top of shit that just already looked fine. And I was like, oh, like, I don't know, maybe that's a bit much. But in this game, it's almost like keeping everything a little bland works, because it feels like it's designed to be looked at through the camcorder. And when it doesn't feel like that, it falls apart.
Yeah, and I mean, I should have mentioned this earlier, but there's definitely, you know, the found footage Blair Witch Project influence going on.
Oh,
and
huge.
You need that. So,
yeah, for sure. The game also has...
It does throw back... God, there's a documentary in the 70s where a film crew goes into a mental hospital and films how fucked up things are. Oh, and I feel like in terms of story, it's a direct throwback of that.
Also, the camcorder is a cool addition to the game because they actually made a little bit of a gameplay element around it. Like, so it's not just a substitute for the flashlight and an aesthetic filter. You can actually use it to record. And if you record at the right times, you get extra documents to look through and notes on what's going on in the story.
Right.
So you'll still find all the main story notes and see all the main scenes you need to see to understand what's going on in the game. Like, you can't miss anything major, but you get a lot more context if you actually fully maximize using your camcorder.
That's an interesting thing I just thought of. Both of these games we're talking about today kind of have like job-based roles.
Oh yeah, totally.
Ripley's very, very engineering-like because she does hacking and she uses a torch cutter.
Yeah.
And then this guy, you can be a reporter and camcorder specific areas and do journalism work while playing.
Right. Like you get his written report by recording things.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like if you record it, it means that someone later gets to look at it and write up the report, and then you get to read the report now. It's really cool. Like, and I like that idea, which Alien Isolation does really well, like you just mentioned, that like you're given tools, but they're not for combat.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you have this tool set, but it's actually to serve something else. And so it's like, well, we can develop the story more. We can make collectibles that aren't just ammo and health. And
she can build things and it'll make sense.
Exactly. And
yeah.
I really like that about both these games, and I think that that's why in the first game I really like the camcorder. In the second Outlast I hate it, but that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, it's because, you know, outside of that, the main gameplay that you're participating in is you scope out, like I said, you scope out an area, you see where the enemies are, and you try to stealth around them. It is very tense. There are some gross and sort of scary enemies in this game, and a lot of times, like, there's a lot of jump scares. I think it's maybe a little heavy on the jump scares.
Oh yeah, it's definitely jump scare heavy.
But I feel like there's also moments where stuff pops out at you or whatever, and it's almost like you feel like you earned it because you're like, all right, I fucked up. Like,
yeah, I mean, absolutely.
You know, like it's not like a pure Five Nights at Freddy's experience of just like you win and get jump scared. Like,
Yeah. Contrasting with Alien Isolation, I feel like you can outrun and outsmart the enemies in Outlast.
yes, you can.
Which at some points it's unavoidable. Like there's a guy chasing you and he's like trying to bash your head in with a pipe or something. And you can outrun them and outsmart them, and it's kind of empowering.
Right. Although I will counter that with there is some weird inconsistent AI.
Oh yeah, there's jank. There's horror jank.
Yeah, which like I said, I mean, Alien Isolation hides that so well that it made it a really immersive experience. But like in this game, it doesn't hide it at all. It's literally like you can walk right in front of a guy and he won't see you, and then another guy will see you through walls.
Yeah. And I felt in a lot of games when I'm playing scary horror games, if like I'm just like too stressed, what I'll do is I'll like throw myself at the bad guy several times so it's not scary anymore.
Oh, nice.
And so I did that in Outlast a couple times, and it really reveals how like jank the AI is.
Yeah.
Because you'll just see them do like totally dumb shit. They're going to assume that you're going to be like running from the character. They're not going to be on the screen most of the time.
Right.
The tension's mostly in your head. But if you're actually looking at the bad guys and watching what they're doing, it's sort of goofy. And that might be a good tip for people that are afraid of playing horror games.
Yeah, it's definitely like more of a jump scare horror than like the sort of stress terror of Alien Isolation.
Yeah. Well, the score always has this great sense of dread to it. So you never feel comfortable, like even if it's just because of the music.
I have mixed feelings on it. There's parts of it that work super, super well. And then there's parts of it where, it just feels like a lot of good ideas that don't totally cohere.
It's definitely got budget game vibe, and I think that's fine.
Oh, yeah. I think it's fine too because overall, like I was saying earlier, I like the design of this game a lot. And I think there's just so many parts of it where it's like everything comes together. So you're in a creepy, tense area where you're sneaking and you're looking through the camcorder and there's enemies and you just barely get away. Like, there's all these great photo finish moments, which Alien Isolation has that too. But in this game, it's just there's some of them are a little like more just because you can tell it was planned out that way.
Right. Well, the game is inherently more linear, which I think works to its advantage because the storyline elements can intermingle with the gameplay elements so much better.
Right. And there's moments where it works better just based on that haunted house element that we were talking about earlier, where it's like, if you design a haunted house and you're supposed to just walk through it, it does work better if you just walk through it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love open-ended games. Like I love Alien Isolation. I love Prey.
Well, it didn't work out for Outlast 2. They done fucked up.
Yeah, but and so it's like, but it's a lot harder actually to do that style. And like if you just stick with the linear style, it's easier to deliver something that's just more cohesive.
Yeah. It's more movie-like too.
Yeah. I think too, I like the story in Outlast because it's so subtle. Like it's literally just finding the notes and piecing together that there's this, project going on and things aren't what they seem. And it's like we said earlier, it's not going to stick with you. It doesn't have any deep themes, but it's just unobtrusive and you get to discover it yourself enough that you feel like you had a part in it.
Right.
And I think that's a really smart move on their part, on the developers' part.
Yeah, I mean, there's an infamous part where, spoiler alert, you get your finger cut off. It's hard to not cringe because it's in first person and the guy's kind of a blank slate. And I think the game does that to you several times.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of just like making you not feel comfortable or safe.
Right. I mean, you also have in the notes here, there's a part where you, once again, spoiler alert, there's a part where you break your camcorder.
Yeah, oh yeah. And man, and I think at that part of the game, you're being stalked. And so, the screen's shattered. You're looking at the world through like all these little shattered bits. And the game just keeps escalating and escalating.
Right.
Like good post-rock song. And then it gets to the super heavy part. But then, unfortunately, like most survival horror games, I would argue that the last third of the game, it loses its luster because it outstays its welcome a bit once you get into the laboratories.
Yeah, I mean,
very Resident Evil. I mean, the last third's in a lab.
Yeah, I agree. I think that because this game is shorter and tighter than a lot of the other experiences I've had in this genre, I thought it wasn't as bad.
It gets away with it a little more.
Yeah, exactly. I could put up with it at the very least.
Yeah, and I think it also switches tone because it goes from like a cult of psychos to like this like, spoiler alert, fucking like trans-dimensional psychic warrior thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, that the penultimate antagonist in the game is just kind of stupid, I think.
Yeah, it's just like kind of the smoke monster from Lost.
Yeah, for sure, I guess. And it's just like a guy in a bubble. I don't know, it was just kind of a letdown to get that far and have like the smoke monster from Lost kill everyone.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree at all. But I sort of like got what they were trying to do. Yeah. Like it was kind of dumb, but once again, I mean, I feel like the rest of it was well done enough that I was like, all right, I'll let you guys have this one.
Well, it's just like RE7. I mean, I love the scary mental hospital. Who doesn't like scary mental hospitals? They're spooky. Right. Who doesn't love Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know?
Yeah.
But they always have to like throw a secret laboratory in at the end. And it I don't know, to me, it just deflates the horror.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think it sort of shines this hacky light on a game that had been succeeding before.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the Resident Evil problem too. It's like you're so on the game's side, and then it does that, and you're just like, this is, it doesn't ruin the game. It's not that you hate it, but it's like, suddenly everything's in a different light and it looks kind of hacky, and you're like, oh, maybe this game was not even really written at all.
Yeah, well, it's like Alien 1 being horror, and then the sequel's an action movie, action sci-fi.
Right.
The last third of every Resident Evil game turns into the action sci-fi sequel.
Yeah, it is really weird.
I think that might be like a problem with horror games in terms of theme, is that they always have to make it end up being a monster, while just human beings are like the perfect monster. There's never been like a good serial killer game or something.
Right. It's the tension between the game elements and trying to do something that is fundamentally anti-game.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, this genre represents the peak of that struggle. And once again, we're going to talk about that a lot more when we talk about Soma in the next episode. But it's like, you're trying to make something that's an anti-game, but then you're trying to keep the game elements in and balance them out with these other elements. And it's just like, it just kind of turns into either a total head fuck or a tailspin. And I think that the Resident Evil games and Outlast go more in the tailspin direction of just like, this is pretty dumb.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with a budget game that's short, that's a night long, you finish it in a night.
Right.
I think people need to embrace that. I mean, we're all busy. Not every game needs to be Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah. Well, and I'd rather play a short, tight game that I like a lot a few times rather than one game that drags on forever. And that's just me.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel that way about a lot of stuff, where it's like a really long TV series where the ending sucks and you just like compulsively have to watch the whole series. And it's like, well, what if this was just 2 seasons, like Twin Peaks, and I just watched it a bunch of times?
Yeah. Yeah. Or, I mean, some albums that should have been EPs, but they like fluff it up with a bunch of garbage.
So many.
Yeah.
So many. Well, and, speaking of that, I think I want to talk about the sequel to Outlast a little bit, because I think it really throws into sharp relief that tension and how well the first one navigated it, because I think the second one just is a total fumble.
full disclosure, I played maybe 45 minutes of it and hated it. The first interaction with a bad guy, I probably died 10 times in a row, not understanding the game mechanics. I played the beginning of Outlast 2 before I played Outlast 1.
Sure.
And it was just infuriating, and it was stupid, and I fucking hated it.
Well, guess what, motherfucker? I played the whole game, and I hate it more.
I mean, it did have cool, like, I love, like, Southern Gothic mysticism, like, this weird, like, swamp trash mixed with Catholicism kind of creepiness, like True Detective Season 1.
Yes.
I love that as, like, a milieu.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the reason I am so mad at Outlast 2 is because I loved so much of it. Like, okay, here's the big changes. Number one, it's got that badass Southern Gothic aesthetic, which rules.
Yeah.
And the graphics for the environments are like eye-popping. It's so fucking gorgeous. Like, everything is beautiful. The colors are incredible. It's so amazing. And the other big thing that they like leveled up is the hiding mechanic. So basically the game is now open environment. So all the environments are much larger. Most of them are outdoors. And because of that, they adapted it so that the stealth is a lot more nuanced and the AI is a lot more nuanced as well. So it's like, if you hide in bushes and it's dark, the enemies won't see you unless you make a bunch of noise. And it works really, really well. Now, for everything that I just listed that I liked about this game, they decided to put a giant fucking handicap on it. So with the hiding, for example, they left barrels and lockers around everywhere. So you can hide in barrels and hide in lockers, but it's like pure RNG. The enemies will probably find you and kill you. As opposed to if you just use the game like they designed it to be, which is that like you can hide wherever you want. It actually works super well, and it makes the game so much more fun and nuanced.
So you feel like if it was more linear, it would have been more successful?
No, I think if they had just gotten rid of all the stupid props, like if there weren't lockers and barrels and all this dumb crap that it's encouraging you to hide in when it doesn't work, it actually is better. Because like I played the game without, I only hid in the locker once and I got caught.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I never used the lockers, not even in Alien Isolation.
Yeah, but it's like in Outlast 2, they keep putting this shit everywhere, but then they also improve the gameplay so much that you don't need it anymore. The same thing goes for the graphics, where it's like the graphics are gorgeous, and then they still make you use the fucking camcorder, and the camcorder looks like shit. So instead of the first game, it actually added an aesthetic. In the second game, it actually took away the aesthetic.
Interesting.
And so you just keep wanting to look at the game because it's so beautiful, and it just won't let you. The big problem, though, beyond that, is that they changed how the camcorder works so that the way that you do anything is timing based. So in the first game, you could choose to record stuff if you wanted to, and you had to record for a certain amount of time. And then you got like notes. But you could still pick up notes the normal way. Like you could just walk up and pick up a note.
Right.
In Outlast 2, the way you pick up notes is the same mechanic as recording clips. So you have to point your camera at it and record it.
For like everything?
For everything. So, and they put notes in areas that are chase scenes. So the only way that you would collect the notes is if you stopped during a chase and pointed your camera at a note and hit record.
Yeah, no thanks.
Exactly. What that means is that you missed the entire story. So like I got to the end of the game and I was like, what the fuck just happened? And I looked it up online and it's like, oh, you just missed like all the notes. And I was like, well, yeah, because there were crazy hicks chasing me. But yeah, so it's like you can just, instead of the first game where there were parts of the story that were collectible, now the entire story is collectible and it's hyper difficult to collect.
That's weird.
It's horrible.
I mean, the whole trope of horror games, everyone leaving notes everywhere and having that as incidental story, it's kind of like goofy and antiquated. But this seems like the opposite solution to that. Exactly.
Like I've always thought, like I'd love it if someone came up with a better solution, and this is just someone coming up with a much worse idea. The other big problem is that the game, and so here's a spoiler for the ending of the game, although I'm not really going to spoil it, I guess. It's stupid and it's terrible. Basically, like it tries to tackle all these heavy themes like sexual assault and like abortion and, you know, like religion, and it's super weird and heavy-handed. And like there's a scene where you watch your girlfriend like give birth and then die.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and it's all just like so fucked up and poorly done, and it looks like shit and it's tasteless, that I just got to the end and it was just like, you guys did not have the ability or like the bandwidth to tackle these heavy topics, and instead of trying to be better or just not trying, you were like, dude, pedal to the metal, like. And it was just like so fucked up. And once again, like, you also just don't know what's going on, and then once you know what's going on, it makes even less sense. It's like, why did you show me this? Why did you decide to tackle these like topics? And it's interesting because I hated that game by the end, and it really was mostly like the end, like the last couple hours just tank super hard, because before that I was so impressed with how they handled the problems from the first game that I almost thought it was a better solution to how to follow up that game than Resident Evil 7, you know? And then by the end I was like, this is horrible. Like, why did you fucking do this? Why did you make me watch simulated death, birth? Like, oh my God, it was so stupid.
So one of the questions I came into this episode thinking is, you know, how much do you think Resident Evil 7 owes to Outlast?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. Like, the conversation at the time was all about PT, but I don't think so. I think it's mostly Outlast.
Yeah. I played Outlast probably a year after I played RE7. Mm-hmm. And you know, the whole time I was just thinking, this is so RE7. Even when you get to the laboratory, the laboratory in RE7 is so much like the lab in Outlast.
Right, and I think that the two series are kind of paralleling each other now, because they're both trying to figure out how you solve the problems with this subgenre of games, and overall how you fold in different types of horror games. And you know, Outlast was an interesting, partially elegant solution. RE7 was another really interesting, partially elegant solution. Mm-hmm. And just kind of see what they're going to do next with it. But I think RE7 owes a lot to Outlast.
Well, word on the streets is that Outlast 3 is going to happen, but it's going to be a big departure for the series.
It fucking better be, man. That Outlast 2 sucked so bad. It was, you know, it's just such a bummer. It's like, I finally get how like I would feel if I still gave a shit about Metal Gear Solid, where it's like, they keep throwing in cool ideas and then just like shitting all over them. And it's just like, oh yeah, I get it now, guys. I stopped caring after like Snake Eater. I kind of stopped caring after Metal Gear Solid. But I got that feeling finally where it's like, you almost had it. You almost did it. You know?
Yeah.
And the parallel problem of trying to tackle really heavy themes and just fumbling the shit out of it.
I mean, Hideo Kojima is such a fucking dork. He wants to like tackle all this stuff, but he does it in the goofiest ways.
He's a hack writer.
I feel like he should probably just try to make a couple movies or something with all his money.
I don't know if he could write a movie, man.
I don't know. Well, he's like a big like David Lynch fan and shit, so it'd probably just like end up being super weird and like pointless.
Right.
But at the same time, I mean, he needs to let these demons out, and I don't think making like fun games is doing it.
No.
Like, yeah. I mean, what we've seen of Death, like I don't want to talk shit about like a game that's not nearly out, but what we've seen of Death Stranding is like, I mean, the themes that it makes you think about and everything are really interesting and cool, but like, there's no gameplay. And what are you gonna do? You're gonna put some video gamey weird shit with your deep meanings of, I don't know. Yeah, like, what are you doing?
Well, and it's actually really funny that you bring up Death Stranding, because I think it's in the same conversation. I mean, he's said in the interviews, he's like, all video games are derived from this arcadey idea that hitting is your only interaction, or taking is your only interaction. You can hit, you can take. And he's like, well, what if there are other interactions? What would that look like? How would that work? That's the whole hide 'em up genre fundamentally is trying to answer that question. And so are all the sort of anti-game horror games. You know, anything that's not Resident Evil 4 or Dead Space is trying to answer that question, where it's like, what would it look like if you had other interactions? How else could you have this interaction? Death Stranding I'm interested in because it's obviously Hideo Kojima trying to answer that question. But yeah, I agree. I don't think he's got it in him to really do it. Because he's a hack.
I don't know. I love Snatcher and I love Police Knots.
Snatcher is one of my favorite games of all time. Yeah.
Even though both of those games are just, they're extreme tropes. Like everything from Snatcher is borrowed from something, and everything from Police Knots is borrowed from something.
Right. Well, and I think that's when you get to this point in time when we're looking at these games, like, you can't just take things out and put other things in. Like, and once again, I love that this is kind of our wrap-up conversation for this, because, like, that's literally harks back to what I said at the beginning. Like, you know, we're accidentally doing a full ellipsis here, which is fucking brilliant. But that, like, the whole item of genre is literally just taking out one element and putting in another. But the games that are effective at it really have a thoughtful design that pushes you towards maximizing all the mechanics in the game. And the games that are bad at it just feel like they took out the combat and put in the stealth.
Or it's just pointless spooky like Slender Man or something.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, there's no explanation for why you can't fight or why you're even there in the first place. Like, I love that there are games that are trying to do it more thoughtfully. And then, yeah, looking at certain games in the future, it's just like, I don't know if you're going to actually have a thoughtful approach to this, or if it's just going to be another, like, here we are type situation, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Death Stranding, 0 out of 10, preemptively. I'm going to go review bomb it right now. Fuck it.
I hate it.
I hate it.
Mads Mikkelsen is Bay, though.
Yeah.
Gotta say.
Yeah, that's true. Mads Mikkelsen is 10 out of 10. Would. You know, it's just like you have to be open to the idea that if Mads Mikkelsen was in your life, that your sexuality would be different. You just have to be open to that, you know, I think. Like,
did you see that movie where he played a chicken fucker?
No, but I know what you're talking about.
You gotta watch it. It's great.
It sounds great. I mean,
it's like, wow, dude, you can, like, act to be unattractive.
Whoa, acting, huh?
That's crazy.
What, acting? It's my Solid Snake impression.
Yeah, there's another movie where he plays like this child molester, or he's accused of molesting a kid.
Oh,
Lacey
shit.
made me watch it, and it was just like ultimately depressing because he like didn't do it. And like his neighbors like killed his dog and shit, and I was like, oh my god, why am I watching
They
this?
killed the dog. Come on.
Yeah, they kill. Lacey makes me watch the most depressing shit.
Lacey, stop killing the dog.
You're killing me.
You're killing the dog. You're killing James. Come on. Come on, be a pal.
Yep. Anyways, Outlast 3.
Outlast
Coming up
3
soon.
when? 0 out of 10. Review bomb starting now.
Absolutely. Outlast 3 starting. Mads Mikkelsen.
Okay, now I'm on board.